Hi everyone, so this case study video is all about the movie Up. I'm going to be showing you how the dialectic approach is used in this movie specifically, and how it kind of moves the plot forward and moves the story forward. So, let's get stuck in. In true Pixar style, they open their movie by setting up the context of the world that we are about to explore. In the case of Up, they initially set up Charles Muntz as an explorer who's the hero of a young boy who grows into Mr. Fredrickson. So this story is going to be about adventure and what adventure means to this young boy. Then he meets a young girl who's also an adventurer at heart. They grow up together, fall in love, and all the while they dream of going to South America like their hero. Mr. F literally crosses on his heart that he will take her. But life just kept getting in the way. Then they find out that they can't have children, and the only thing that brings his wife some comfort is the thought of continuing their adventures and filling up their adventure book. They grow old, and Mr. F is yet to fulfill his promise, and just as he's about to, his wife gets sick and passes away. All of this sets up the character so that we understand he's an adventurer. He has an unfulfilled promise to the love of his life who's now passed away. We understand who he is, what motivates him, why it motivates him, and most importantly, we empathize with all of his reasons and motivations. Fear. Once we know all that, we explore his comfort zone and the uneasy balance his life is currently in. We see that he's still in the same house, even though there's a huge development going on around him, and that no amount of money will get him to move. He takes care of the house as if it's his wife. His fear is rooted in letting go of the memory of his wife. This is what is dictating his actions and explains the life he has made for himself. So his thesis at the start of the movie is, I am a widower. All widowers are alone, and all their love is behind them. Therefore, I am alone, and all of my love is behind me, which manifests itself as him taking care of his house, which will keep the memory of his wife, the only person who ever loved him, alive. He's also told the developers will do anything they can to get his house. This is a threat to his status quo, which right now he rejects out of hand. And then the agent of change shows up, the person who will enact the will of the writer and impose the antithesis on Mr. F. It's Russell, who just wants to help him, but Mr. F sends him away. This is Mr. F rejecting change and refusing to let anyone else into his life in order to preserve his thesis. And he wants to preserve his thesis because this is what his life so far has taught him to be true. And because Mr. F's rejecting change, he's punished by his mailbox being destroyed. And Mr. F, who knows he must preserve his house as if he is taking care of his wife, gets angry when it's broken by the builders. He reacts emotionally, gets violent, and because of that, he's taken to court and forced to leave his home. By trying to escape change and push it away, change has come for him. But Mr. F is stuck in a corner. He must take care of the house he is being forced out of. The only way to maintain his thesis is to fulfill his promise to his wife and take her, the house, to South America. And not only must he go on adventure, but the agent of change, Russell, unbeknownst to him, is going with him. And Mr. F quickly realizes that there's no way to get rid of him. But even thinking of ways to get rid of him results in a storm that forces Mr. F's hand where he must keep Russell around. His fear of letting go of his wife's memory plays out through the storm, where he's more concerned about his possessions than he is for the little boy who wants to help him. This is where the antithesis really starts to show its value to Mr. F. The antithesis being, I'm part of a family. Family is always there for you. Therefore, I will always be there for you. This antithesis is spread through Russell, and Russell starts to prove this when he steers the house through the storm. This is the first sign that there are people out there who want to be there for Mr. F. But he dismisses this as Russell not knowing what he's talking about. This is again Mr. F resisting change. He refuses to accept that other people care about his life because it's a direct attack on his thesis, and he's punished for refusing it. As he tries to get rid of Russell, he lets his house down too soon and he ends up on the wrong side of Paradise Falls. And the only way to weigh down the house is by both him and Russell anchoring it to the ground. Again, this is the writers forcing Mr. F to accept change into his life by enforcing his need to keep Russell around, which Mr. F reluctantly accepts. Also, they impose a limit of 3 days to get the house over to the falls. This creates a deadline and a sense of urgency and forces Mr. F to prioritize what he really wants to accomplish over the course of the story. Then we're introduced to some new obstacles Mr. F will need to overcome. The giant bird, who we'll eventually come to know as Kevin, and the dogs of Mr. Charles Muntz. We learn that Kevin is super fast and is able to escape from the dogs with the help of Mr. F's hearing aid. So he could potentially be an ally, and the dogs are potentially a threat at this point. Russell needs to go to the bathroom, and ends up coming across the bird, Kevin. And once Mr. F sees Russell with the bird, he instantly tries to protect Russell. This is the first time we see a change in Mr. F's thesis. He tries to take care of Russell, and in this instance, it protects him from potential danger. But Russell, our agent of change, wants to keep the bird around, because our writers know that being there for one person isn't going to be enough to change Mr. F. So Russell leaves a trail of chocolate, so Kevin follows them. Then they meet Doug, the talking dog, and Doug wants to take Kevin to his master. Mr. F is happy to let him, against the wishes of Russell. And Doug also wants Mr. F to be his master too, but he rejects being Doug's master. This again is Mr. F trying to resist the change being imposed on him. And because he's again resisting change, he's punished. A window on the house gets broken. Mr. F reacts by trying to get rid of both Kevin and Doug, and then tries to outrun them so that they can't find him. But he can't. He's stuck with them the same way he's stuck with Russell. At least he feels stuck, but stuck with people who want to help him and love him. This is the formation of his new family. He doesn't love them all yet, but he does now have a family to take care of sorts. They all sleep under the house, and Russell tries to put a tent together for Mr. F to sleep in. It's a failure, and Russell confides in Mr. F that he's never made a tent before, because his dad never took him camping and showed him how, even though his dad promised. Mr. F then feels for him and decides to agree to help Kevin, even though the dogs are after them. This is Mr. F finally beginning to accept some change, by showing some compassion towards Russell and making him feel safe and heard. Because of this, he's rewarded. Russell makes him promise to cross his heart. This is the same way his wife made him make a promise at the start of the movie. It's a sign that family can be found anywhere, and he's beginning to accept at least one member of his new family. The next morning, Mr. F hopes that the bird is gone, and Russell won't notice. He does notice, and it isn't gone. And Kevin, on top of that, has babies to take care of. Mr. F is still not prepared to let go of his wife, the house, in order to help Kevin, even though Russell wants to help Kevin. And yet again, because he breaks his promise to Russell by not prioritizing Kevin over himself, he gets punished. The dogs finally capture them. Either way, he was delayed in getting the house to Paradise Falls, but now he has no control over when he's able to get there. And to make things worse, he's about to meet his childhood hero. The dogs take them to the Spirit of Adventure. They meet Charles Muntz, and all is seemingly well. Mr. F tells Muntz that he's there to fulfill his promise to his wife. Muntz is there because of his vanity and pride. They're both there for contrasting reasons. Mr. F is there to serve the wishes of his wife, Muntz to serve his own ego. This puts them in opposition to one another. Now Russell innocently lets slip that they know about the bird and how to catch it, and Muntz threatens them both. Mr. F is forced into a choice. Does he protect Kevin at his own risk, or does he let Muntz catch the bird so he will leave him alone? And he chooses to protect Kevin. He puts the needs of others above himself, like a family man would, which is the final iteration of transforming the thesis into the antithesis. And as a reward, both Doug and Kevin help them to escape. But in the process, Kevin is hurt and needs help getting back home. And Mr. F, with his new thesis, decides to help Kevin. In that moment, he forgets his fear, forgets to remember his wife, and the cost of that is betraying his new family to protect the memory of his old family. Because just as Kevin is about to be safe, Muntz catches the bird and sets a fire underneath his house. Mr. F is facing a test of whether he truly believes in the new thesis, and under the pressure of the situation, he reverts back to his original thesis and saves his house, letting Kevin get taken away. He betrays the trust of Russell, Kevin, and Doug when he makes this choice. He knows it was wrong, but he wasn't ready to make the right choice. Russell is upset and mad at Mr. F, justifiably. Mr. F tells him that he didn't even want any of this. And they get the house to Paradise Falls, but it's a hollow victory. He fulfilled his promise to his wife, and he feels terrible. His actions have led to a child giving up on something that they love. He doesn't know what to do. So he tidies his house, and he looks through his adventure book and realizes that his wife had thought all along that he, Mr. F, was her biggest adventure, and that he'd essentially kept his promise by spending his life with her. This information frees Mr. F from his guilt, and thus his need to fulfill this external goal of getting his house to Paradise Falls. He can honor the memory of his wife by sharing his life with someone who needs him, like Russell. Mr. F now has to take action to prove that he embodies the antithesis that he now believes in. And he does that by throwing all of his furniture and everything that he built with his old family out of the house to rescue and save his new family. And when he eventually catches up with Russell, he's all tied up and keeps him tied up in the house in order to keep him safe. And while he tries to rescue Kevin, he gets into a fight with Muntz. Muntz destroys his legacy for his pride. Mr. F won't do the same and fights to save his family. And in the end, Mr. F is faced with the same choice as before: save his house or save his family. And this time, he makes the right choice, and he saves his family at the cost of saving his house. In that moment, he embodies the antithesis, and because he's changed, he's rewarded with love and friendship. And we finally see the rewards of all of their hard work. Mr. F is there to pin a badge on Russell. He's able to be there for someone he loves. He isn't alone anymore. So that's it. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.